Now, let's go to the Ghanaian Times and take a look at this story. We'll tie that story in with what's on the business fine that later on. The Cocobod secures $1.8 billion loan for purchases. The story says that the Ghana Cocobod has secured 1.8 billion loan facility for the purchase of cocoa beans from farmers for the 2016-2017 crop season. Now, when the cocoa plant perform better and require further funds, the arrangement allows for an additional $200 million to rack up the figure to $2 billion. The facility comes with an all-inclusive rate of 1.48%, with a 4-month moratorium and a 7-month repayment period, which could commence in February next year. The amount, which was raised by a consortium of 24 banks, mostly from Germany, was oversubscribed by $640 million. So 2015-2016, the same was done, and it was settled last month. Dr. Puni, who is in charge of the sector, says government is making frantic efforts to support cocoa farmers to address issues that are impacting negatively on cocoa production. So he assured that the 850,000 target for the 2016-2017 season will be met. Now let me start with you. Since '92, we have embarked on this journey of borrowing to buy cocoa beans. Is it the best?
Absolutely not right. We are borrowing to pay interest. We are borrowing to pay principal on loans. We are borrowing to even borrow. We've reached a point where the borrowing appetite of government in terms of the domestic debt has now pushed interest rates for the commercial banks between 32 to 35%. We've reached a point where Ghana now has the most enviable record of issuing the largest interest-rated denominated bonds in the Euro bond market. Last year's 10.75% broke all existing records. And when a government is perceived to be at risk, now Moody's rates our bonds at B. B means highly speculative, non-investment grade, and it's just a polite terminology for junk-rated bonds. When a country has that profile, it also affects the institutions within it. That is why somebody would say that, you know, if you look at the son, you can see, if you see the son, you can see the father in him. And that is the reason why, even though it's the same quantity, it's the same amount, it's the same debt that we went to the same people from last year to this year, the interest rate that we were given as far as Cocobod jumped up from 1.19% in 2015 to 1.47% in 2016. 4.8 in 2016. The second point is the target. We did close to about 700,000 metric tons last year. What have we done so differently? What impact in terms of additional crops that are coming onto the market? Because the issue with cocoa, we need to have a very radical and structural change. Is the people who are doing the farming are still our grandfathers, very elderly people, using the same tools that were being used about 50 to 100 years ago. The trees are very old. I mean, if you look at Ivory Coast and Ghana, and you compare the yield per hectare, it tells you what the problem is. Our yield is so low because of the old trees, which have been the same trees that have been bearing fruit for about 20, 30 years. So we would need to really adjust the structural changes in the cocoa seedlings and also trying to get not just the youth, because how do you get the gestation period for cocoa to turn around is between 5 to 7 years.
So we have a new breed that I think bears fruits faster than we used to. Yes.
But the traditional is between 5 to 7. Now, if you want youth to go into agriculture, you're going into areas and telling chiefs to make land available for the youth to go into cocoa. These are some of the policies of Cocobod, appealing to chiefs to make land available. Now, if the chief can sell this land to a Chinese galamsey operator or an investor who wants to come and buy land and use, why would this chief allow his land to be just taken up and given to youth to do agriculture? It doesn't work like that anymore. You don't expect a youth who has completed either junior secondary school or senior high school to go and live somewhere in the village for 5 years and farm cocoa without making any provision as to his allowances, his upkeep, and how he's going to provide for himself during that period. So there's one thing with providing seedlings for the youth, but that does not necessarily translate into the youth jumping into agriculture and boosting productivity. I doubt very much that we'll be able to achieve even more than 700,000 metric tons this year. I doubt very much.
The main season is next month.
I doubt very much. And with the erratic supply of rain, with the harvest not coming in as it's supposed to come in, with the impact of fertilizers which are not getting to the farmers, and the spraying which has literally been abandoned and subjected most cocoa farmers to the agony of pests and diseases, with galamsey operators getting into farming cocoa communities, just cutting them down with impunity without any sanctions or arrest, the already precarious cocoa harvest is also going to be negatively affected by some of these practices. So when we go out there to borrow on the assumption that we are going to bring in between 800 to 900,000 metric tons, and that is the basis of the cocoa, when one, we don't control the world prices of cocoa, and two, we seem to have lost the fight in jumping over 700,000 metric tons. And now Cocobod has now become the feeder road department for the cocoa growing areas. Cocobod now believes that doing the road network to the cocoa areas should be their preserve, and they are doing that. Yes, it could be a positive catalyst to ensure that cocoa is carted, but perhaps if they could arrange to deal with feeder roads who are mandated by government to do this, as opposed to the appearance that Cocobod is using this as another avenue for the perception of corruption which has permeated the system so much, it would at least vindicate or remove Cocobod from doing something which technically it is not mandated to do. So there's one thing with coming in and saying that Cocobod has secured 1.8 million, which we have been doing since 1992.
Right. What
stops us? What happens to all the profits? What happens to all the banks locally from putting together a consortium, every year the profits that we make from cocoa, which sometimes is about 100% in the international market, since 1992. And we still have to go to the market to borrow. It's embarrassing. And Ghanaians, it's sad that yesterday was the Founders' Day for Kwame Nkrumah, but I'm sure in his grave, if he should read about this, he'll be turning upside down comfortably.
I'm grateful, Nana, for your time. Dr. Boateng Jenim, so 92 to now, we go in there to take the load. Can we put together, or are we able to put together $1.8 billion to do these purchases locally?
I do not actually know the amounts involved when it comes to how much they are borrowing.
$1.8 billion.
1.8 billion.
Yes.
If you do the calculation based on 1.8 billion and we can make a profit of 100%, then 1.8 billion multiplied by 20, in that case, is a significant amount. It's 2 times 20, so close to about 40 million. 40 billion. Then I think it makes sense we could have generated this if we had looked at this. But this is just a basic calculation of how we could have saved. But my concern has not only been with Cocobod. My concern has been with the wider Ghanaian approach to doing things. We're talking about Cocobod, but it is not very, very different from how the finance ministry has even been developing their own budget. They, year in, year out, there is a huge difference between revenue and expenditure. I don't know much about budgets, how they are done. I only know about doing simple ones for my faculty and others. But if I look at the fact that Ghana is made up of aggregates of individual homes, and I run my home similar to how the Ghanaian budget is done, then I possibly think that I will end up in Isawam. Yes, because look, year in, year out,
there's a deficit.
Yes, there is a deficit, and we are always looking up to, I really can't understand, looking up to foreign investment or whatever to make up that deficit. I took the trouble, look at the last 20 years, the budgets. This is very, very basic to me. Revenue is always lower than expenditure. Imagine my salary per year or annually is 2,000 Ghana cedis. And then I budget for 3,000 for 20 years. For the last 20 years, with interest, possibly I'll be in jail. So there are some things, economic things, indicators and others that sometimes when I bring it down to the ordinary person, I really don't understand. So for me, what Cocobod is doing is just a good replica of what the country has been doing for years. And again, I will ask the question, how different is it from that of GMPC? I remember there was a lot of hulu-balu about GMPC going out there to borrow. I didn't know that Cocobod continues to borrow every year since 1992. So what is the difference? Why were we making noise about GMPC having the independence to go and borrow, as against Cocobod that has been borrowing since 92, which is 16 years, 26 or 24 years ago? I don't understand.
That's a huge question.
I don't understand.
All right. Ricky, Dr. Opuni talks about the fact that issues like aging cocoa farmers, overaged farms, the youth who are not interested in going into cocoa farming. Now, these issues government is working to deal with, and he thinks that these challenges are being addressed.
My brother, I'm not going to concern myself with that immediately. I'm just worried about state-run corporations. Cocobod, by my simple understanding, has been a failure for this period. If you cannot buy your primary product yourself and sell, you have no business being in the business. Pure and simple. Why we continue, I don't know whether it's a colonial hangover, we feel sad that Ghana Airways has gone and maybe now Cocobod will also go. We may have to just wake up from our slumber. This is an interesting revelation. I didn't know. Every year we religiously go and borrow a sum of money, come and buy the cocoa, pretend that we are in charge, sell it, and for some reason we don't make profits. And then we are cleaning up shop to go and borrow again.
I think we make profits.
That's for the profit we do.
You see, if we are making profits, nobody's mentioned it. So we don't want to go there.
Okay.
But the point is, I'm happy, paradoxically, that this started in 1992 and went through the NDC in 1992 and went through the MPP and now it's back to the NDC. So thankfully, this is something on which nobody is particularly going to be held responsible. So as a nation, we've just got to wake up. I've heard noises about Shea Nut Board. What has become of it? Is it one of the political promises? Now, you mentioned feeder roads. And what immediately came to my mind is we have got a lot of moribund organizations in this country. We still have State Construction Corporation.
Yes, we have.
SCC. Yes. We still have State Housing Corporation.
Yes.
We still have non-formal education.
They're all there.
Yeah, I don't know why we are interested in having an elaborate machinery when either they are not working or they are being starved of funds or they have been replaced or overlapped by other ministries. The reason why I'm not going to go to Dr. Opuni's stories, what are you going to do about aging farmers? Give them injections to reduce their age? No. It's just because the whole prospect of being a cocoa farmer is not very enticing. We have inherited an educational system and a world outlook that gives every young man, he wants to wear a tie, he wants to be in the city, he wants to now drive a Range Rover. Range Rovers have become cheaper than Beetles in this country. I mean, more than Beetles. Essentially, there is no way anybody is going to go and say, oh, look, let me go to the village and farm cocoa, and hopefully in 5 years, I will produce cocoa. And hopefully, the government will go and get a loan and then come and buy it from me. There are too many ifs, ifs, ifs. But where does this send me to? It sends me to our politicians. Instead of us pitching ourselves into two opposing groups and bad-mouthing each other and finding fault with each other, we are collectively a disgrace. Kwame Nkrumah wouldn't be reading in his grave. He would be feeling it through his veins, if they still are. It's a complete embarrassment that we inherited an elaborate, proud heritage. And every single day we have got more and more educated people, experts, and we can't even keep our ship running. So for me, this is just symptomatic of the general quagmire that this country is being run. And I'm not going to bother about making it an NDC problem or an MPP problem. Like this clearly demonstrates, we've been borrowing from 1992. And I'm sure there have been several efforts to regenerate agric. There were times when we cut agric to fisheries and something, aquaculture, and we keep remodeling ministries. It is, for example, another thing is, once upon a time we had a ministry for the beautification of the city, and that didn't work. Then we had a presidential special initiative on cleanliness. It didn't work. The whole point is, and I've said in my private circumstances, and I'm a conspiracy theorist, I believe in it. It appeals to me. I believe that the political elite of this country have consciously divided themselves into two apparently opposing groups. And they're taking turns at hoodwinking the masses into giving them the chances to, quote unquote, rape this country. Pure. Because tomorrow, let PPP come in. It's not going to be different. It's NDC, it's MPP. It is not going to be different because fundamentally our attitude towards our country is one that we shouldn't be proud of.
And right, just to add to
that,
it's interesting he said that. The NPP in 2000 campaigned, one of their major campaign issues was that they were going to ensure the election of DCs. When they took office in 2000, that idea just disappeared overnight. So manifestos, promises, campaign issues almost always die out the moment the person finds himself in that elevated seat. So I totally agree with you, Rick.
I'm grateful.